I'm Joanne DeVoe. I'm happy to introduce George Cassis. He was born and raised in Syria, where he attended American high school. At 18, he moved to Lebanon to attend the American University of Beirut, where he received his BS in biology and MS in marine biology and oceanography. After teaching high school and university levels and carrying out marine research for 2 years, he joined the United Nations, where he worked on training science teachers and science teacher trainers who were working in the Palestinian refugee-run schools, the UN-run schools. And these schools were in Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. He spent over 25 years with the United Nations, UNRWA, UNESCO, UNICEF, and in a regional capacity and with senior staff assignments in Lebanon, Sudan, Jordan, and Yemen. He worked in the field of training of educational personnel and in developing and managing programs for children, and also managing emergency programs in developing countries. George Cassis and his wife Jill moved to the United States in 1984, where he worked in the UN headquarters in New York. Presently, he's retired, living in Portsmouth, and he has taught courses in understanding the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict at the Circle of Scholars program at Salve Regina in Newport. We're very glad to have you here.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, the East Bay Citizens for Peace. I'm delighted to be here. It's the first time I do a presentation on this subject, so it's taken me some homework to do. So I hope we have a reasonably good time together tonight. The Middle East is hard to understand, and every time an American goes to the Middle East, they press people in Egypt and say, can you help explain things to me? So one of the journalists put together a graph to simplify matters. Now, since then the situation has gotten a little more complex, but rest assured that by the time you finish tonight, you'll be an expert on the Middle East and far ahead of all of these things. You'll notice that the blue lines represent support, the red lines represent hating each other, and the green lines have no clue as to how things are going between them. I'll leave it at that. Now, when we talk about the Middle East, we sometimes mean different things in different contexts. Whenever we talk about the Middle East, we always talk about Arabia, all the way up to Turkey. That's always included in the Middle East. Sometimes we add Iran and Turkey. Many times we add Egypt. But then also we talk about the Middle East and North Africa and cover all the Arab states as well. To just put things in context, how big the Middle East is compared to the United States, we basically are about equal in area if you include Turkey, Egypt, and Iran into the map. For those who are worried about our ability to meet threats in the Middle East, this is just a graphic showing how many bases we have there in various countries. Since this was prepared, I think a few more have been added, but I think we have enough that we can protect ourselves in that region of the world. What is so special about the Middle East? It's the cradle of civilization, Greek to Roman to Christian to Muslim. It's the birthplace of the three monotheistic religions. It's the crossroads between Asia and Europe. It is the flashpoint between religions and religious sects. And it's a major power interest in East-West rivalry is very key in this region, mainly following the discovery of oil there and the importance of oil in economic development. And finally, to icing on the cake, or the cherry on the icing on the cake, we have the century-old now Israeli-Palestinian conflict, all of which are interrelated. In 610 Anno Domini, Islam was born when Muhammad received a message from Gabriel, the messenger of God, telling him, "Proclaim in the name of thy Lord and Cherisher, who created man out of a mere clot of congealed blood. Proclaim thy Lord is most bountiful. He who taught the use of the pen taught man that which he knew not." That would be the start of Islam. The Prophet dies at age 62. 90% of his followers want to come together and decide who will be his successor. 10% of the followers decide that it's got to be through lineage of the Prophet's family, and the two parties end up having a huge schism between them. After a very important battle in Iraq, in Karbala, the Shiites lost the battle, and basically the Sunnis predominated in Islam to this day. This map shows you where Sunnis and Shiites are in the Middle East. You notice that the main highest concentration of Shiites is in Iran, followed by Iraq and Azerbaijan and Yemen. That's where most of the Shiites are in the world. The rest, where there are Muslims, it's almost uniformly Sunni Muslims. Islam very quickly spread, and within 125 years had already conquered pretty much most of Europe and half of Asia, all the way past Afghanistan and Pakistan. And this is when the concept of crusades came in. Now, I realize that the word crusade comes from cross, but it's also used in a different context as well. A crusade is any of the military expeditions taken by Christians in Europe in the 11th to 13th centuries to recover the Holy Land from the Muslims. It is a story of the crescent against the cross. But any aggressive, vigorous movement for the defense or advancement of an idea of economic, political, religious, or other cause is also called a crusade. We have a crusade to encourage children to eat healthy foods in schools. A holy war, which is pretty much synonymous with jihad in Arabic, is a war dedicated or devoted to the service of God or religion. A war raged for what is supposed or proclaimed to be a holy purpose, as defense, its holy purpose being the defense of the faith. The first crusade took place around 1100. You can see the route that it took. It ended up with the occupation by the Crusaders of Jerusalem. They would conquer it in 1099. This is an artist's depiction of that glorious day in history that Jerusalem was liberated. It would not last long, because within 100 years, and actually not even an Arab, but a Kurd, a Muslim Kurd coming from northern parts of Iraq, would lead Arab armies fight the Crusaders and hold them off and reoccupy Jerusalem. At the height of his power, his sultanate included Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, the Hejaz, Yemen, and other parts of North Africa. Richard the Lionheart led the Third Crusade in 1189 to 1192. He came down with lots of pomp and circumstance, but could not reoccupy Jerusalem, ended up signing a peace treaty with Saladin, by which Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but which also allowed unarmed Christian pilgrims and merchants to visit the city. At this time, there were virtually very, very few Jews there, so they didn't count in the agreement. They were hardly mentioned in the agreement, not even mentioned in the agreement. There would be 8 crusades that follow, and not much progress would take place despite the 8 crusades. At this point in time, 1299, a Turkic tribe, which had its own Turkish language, led by a fellow called Osman, were fleeing the Mongols in Asia. They came fleeing the Mongols and established a Turkish state. The state was inspired and sustained by Islam. They were Muslims, but they came from the hinterland of Asia. The Sultan unilaterally declared himself Caliph, or the person in now representing Islam. The Caliphate had kind of fallen apart. He decided, I am not only Sultan, but I am also the Caliph. Actually, this is where they settled, this little tribe that came from Mongolia. But very quickly, he took over all of Asia Minor, and by 1793, the Ottoman Empire had expanded to rule parts of Europe, North Africa, all the way down both sides of the Red Sea, and all the way into Syria and Iraq, all the way to the Persian Gulf. The way the Ottomans ruled was very unique. They divided the country into little counties, like Newport County and Bristol County, and appointed directly from Istanbul the ruler or the person to be in charge. And the elite of Istanbul would compete as to who will get which county to rule. And the way they competed was by offering the Sultan more annual income every year. But there was no countries in this region. It was like little counties. The counties had nothing to do with each other. Movement between the counties was, there were no roads, there was nothing there. So it was just little town with the surrounding fields around it, became a unit of its own. This would go on. Something very dramatic would happen in the 1850s. The Suez Canal would be opened, and the British Empire, whose ships had to go all the way around Africa to get to London, now could go right through the Red Sea and the Mediterranean and shave a huge distance from now it's 7,200 miles to get to London. It used to be 12,300 miles. A huge advantage and critical importance to the British. Because of the importance, they needed to guard it. The French had built it The Egyptians were half running it. The British decided, what the heck, we better be on the safe side. We just go in and occupy. After all, we're the British Empire. This would go on until 1914, when the Ottoman Empire was starting to feel weakened. They were paranoid about the Tsars of Russia coming down from the north and occupying all of the Ottoman Empire. They approached the British. The British were reluctant to form an alliance with them. So they turned over to the Germans. And they did have an alliance with the Germans. Of course, the Germans and the British were not good friends. So the Germans said, well, you have to do something to weaken the British in your area. And therefore, Turkey decided to declare jihad against the British. That the Germans and good Muslim Turks would fight the British because they were infidels. How Germany fit into the formula, nobody understands, but every Muslim was told, you have to kill the British and throw them out. Well, the British didn't take this line down. They, again, thinking of their economic interests, and especially now that oil had been discovered in Iran and Iraq, they moved right into the Persian Gulf and occupied Basra, the town of Basra, which is the entry point into Iraq and Iran. Basra looked like this, a series of canals and lots of boats. So it was a fairly important mercantile center. The British would extend their rule to Baghdad and occupy it by 1918. And so that covered the Iraq side of the formula, but they still needed to do something about this jihad. Jihad, huh? Okay, we'll show you. So the British decide to establish an Arab bureau in Cairo. And the purpose of this bureau was to harmonize, this is quote unquote, to harmonize British political activity in the Near East. They used to call the Middle East also the Near East. And coordinate propaganda in favor of Great Britain among non-Indian Muslims. So the Turks were promoting jihad against the British. The British now are promoting propaganda in favor of them. Lawrence of Arabia, a young officer, actually by training an archaeologist, but with other connections and interests as well, his position goes to do a few digs in the northern border of Syria, between Syria and Turkey, in an area called Jarablos. Jarablos is a town on the Euphrates River where it enters into Syria, and there happened to be an important dig there. So he went to work, quote unquote, work there. Well, it happened also to be the point where the Germans were building the Berlin to Baghdad railway, which passed right through Jarablos. So he could keep an eye on the Germans and what they were doing in order to, what techniques they were using in building, what relations they had with the locals, and so on and so forth. Okay, now the Arab Bureau had to find a partner. So they turned to someone called Sharif Hussein bin Ali, who was the governor of Mecca, the holiest of Muslim cities. He had that role because of his direct descent from the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad. He had the responsibility to protect the city and ensure the safety of pilgrims performing the annual pilgrimage, or Hajj as they call it in Arabic. The agreement was very simple. Sharif Hussein was to raise a tribal Arab army. The British were to supply intelligence, logistics, training, guns and ammunition. The Sharifian army, with British officers helping organize it, would liberate the Arabian Peninsula, drive the Ottomans out from the Arabian Peninsula and Greater Syria and Iraq. And in return, the British would support an independent Arab government or kingdom to rule over all the liberated lands. You create an army, we'll arm you, you liberate the land, it's yours. That will be your prize. Sharif Hussein said, why not? So